Okay, everyone. Today I am so excited to talk about these books. I picked up copies of them a little over a week ago and then I completely devoured them. I am ashamed that I had not previously heard of this author, Mark Lawrence. I actually had seen a few YouTube videos floating around about Prince of Thorns. It is the Broken Empire trilogy. Book one is Prince of Thorns, then King of Thorns, and then Emperor of Thorns. The series tends to get a bad reputation. In each of these videos, they talk about how the protagonist is disgusting and despicable, arguably evil. Honestly, when you hear that, if you're like me, you're immediately hooked and intrigued, so I went and had to get copies to see what all the fuss is about for myself. There are two camps of people. There are probably more than two camps, but there are two big camps of people. There's gonna be the people that read the first chapter and feel this confusion within themselves because there are these violent, horrible things happening, but it's written in such a way that you actually kind of like the character. There's some qualities to him that draw you in. Then you will be hooked and keep on reading the books. And then there's the camp of people that read the first chapter and they're appalled by the main character and the things that are happening. They set the book down and walk away. There's nothing wrong with being triggered by something like this, but I think those people might have a pessimistic outlook about people, maybe. If you don't believe in redemption or character arcs or that the terrible things that have happened to people and how it can kind of twist them into someone that they weren't before, but who are still capable of accomplishing greater good, then I don't know. If you don't believe in that, then it's probably not the story for you. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I will say, out of all of the books that I have read this year, this shot straight up to the top of my list is my favorites. There are 2 months left in this year, but we'll see if it stays up there, but I just don't see anything toppling it. And I just loved it. I have mentioned before in previous videos that I am good with dark stories. Growing up, I saw things, heard things, and then as I grew older, experienced things that a lot of people don't have to experience, and I'm good with the dark. So I will just kind of give that disclaimer. I'm not going to go into any spoilers right now. I'll give you fair warning before that happens, but I kind of just want to speak generally about the series itself. There is sex, there is violence, there is gore, there is tragedy, unspeakable tragedy, but there is also redemption. I wouldn't say that there is this warm and fluffy happiness at the end, but it's the ending that it needed. Mark Lawrence as a writer. I've read everything from big bloated volumes to really simply structured sentences and just shorter, more concise works, and he falls somewhere in the middle. His writing isn't difficult, but it's so razor sharp. There's wit in it, there's dark humor. I don't think Lawrence would ever call himself a poet, but there was so much gorgeous prose across just the pages, especially in the first 2 books, that you can't help but sit back and reread passages over and over just because of how they flow across the page and just the ideas that are buried in those sentences and those phrases. We wrap up our violent and mysterious world in a pretense of understanding. We paper over the voids in our comprehension with science or religion and make believe that order has been imposed. And, for the most of it, the fiction works. We skim across surfaces, heedless of the depths below. Dragonflies flitting over a lake, miles deep, pursuing erratic paths to pointless ends. Until that moment when something from the cold unknown reaches up to take us. It's just, I could gush about this book forever. It gave me so much to think about, especially when, the seasons have changed. It's cold and miserable here, and I just like to stew about life and existence and what it's all for and meaning and purpose and all that kind of stuff. So that meant a lot to me at this point in my life. If stories had a texture and you could brush your fingers across it, this one would be razor sharp edges and the tiniest pricks of thorns, briar thorns, If it was a coffee, it would be the hottest cup of coffee you've ever had, so hot that it scalds your mouth. It would be so bitter that you kind of pucker and recoil, and it would be so strong that you can't go to sleep and you linger and you stay awake, dwelling and thinking, and that would be the flavor of coffee that this would be. If it was a song, it would be Mad World, probably the Gary Jules version because of the piano and just the haunting melody of it. I'm not knocking the original Tears for Fears version. That honestly, that one would probably work too, just because there are a bit manic parts to it that kind of jive with the protagonist's personality, Jorg Ancrath. There's a little bit of debate on how to pronounce his name. I pronounce it George. There's a character, Brother Elbin, who has a lisp, and he pronounces his name Jorg, or George. I feel like George is probably one that if you had a lisp that you would struggle with the most, so that's just how I pronounce it. What else could I say about these books? I mean, unabashedly give it a perfect score. Whatever the scale is, if it's 5 stars, I'm giving it 5 stars. If it's a scale of 10, I'm giving it a 10. I'm giving it a perfect score. There was just everything that I really appreciate about really good stories. This one was visceral. It made me feel uncomfortable at times. I was appalled at times. There were different scenes that hit so hard that I had to put the book down and step away and honestly just go talk to someone about it. My poor partner, I had to talk his ear off about certain things. There's so many layers to this onion, and I wanted to get to the center of it all. If you appreciate foreshadowing, there's lots of foreshadowing in it. There are so many themes. It would probably take me the rest of 2020 to talk about all of the different themes in it. It has everything. There is some romantic intrigue. There is battle scenes. There is magic. There's just all kinds of things. There are different trials and journeys. I can't express enough how much I think everyone should go and read these books. So what is The Broken Empire about? Well, it is about a fallen prince who is on this journey of righting the dastardly wrongs that have been committed against him and his family. It's about guilt and how to cope with that guilt. It's almost like a survivor's guilt. There's just some really disheartening, very, very tragic, unspeakable things that have happened to him in his life, and it's him just coping with that. So the first book, the scope is kind of small. It's following a couple different timelines, so it's following present day and then jumping back 4 years before when all of this stuff kind of went into motion to kind of explain how he got twisted into what he is today. The first book is about him juggling with what happened to him and how to get back to his lands and his castle and how to get revenge for what was done to him and his family. The second book, the world zooms out a bit. He is seeking to conquer more lands and take what he feels is owed to him. There's an evil that it's expanding throughout the land. There is magic, there's necromancy, there is fire magic. It's interesting how these things come to be. And there's also kind of these monstrous human-like creatures called Lucrota. Through each book, we're zoomed out and zoomed out and zoomed out until we see what the story is really about. So I said earlier, I really love foreshadowing, and I love how Lawrence put this story together. In the beginning, I think it's like chapter 4, George is talking about chess and how everyone is a pawn in a game. They just have to understand, what the game is if they want to win it. As the series goes on, he thinks he knows what the game is, and he tries very hard not to be a pawn in anyone's game and to make everyone else his pawn. By the third book, we clearly see that he was involved in a game of chess that none of us expected. And so I really just thought that was brilliant. So that was like chapter 4 of book 1, and that takes us through the end of the book. There is also moments with just breadcrumbs that are sprinkled. So he talks about, when he's talking about chess, he talks about how bishops aren't necessarily holy. And he says that in chapter 4 as well. As you go along in these books, it's almost like a really terrible game of would you rather, in which your two options, they're just the worst of the worst. You can't even pick which would you rather option they're just both disgusting. But then you pick one and both happen to you. It's that kind of story. Like, you can't win. Like, you can go ahead and pick which scenario you'd rather deal with, but you're gonna end up having both thrown your way. It's like that kind of story. The story is ultimately about this fallen prince coping with these tragedies that have happened to his life. And through each book, there's this little circle, this lens, a monocle maybe, and the world just kind of zooms out and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is all I'm going to say speaking about the series kind of broadly. So now I'm going to jump into spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled, you can bow out. Jorg Ancrath. First off, I think the idea behind this series is so brilliant. I think I read where Lawrence was talking about how if there was ever just mass destruction on a horrific scale worldwide, the book talks about the 1,000 suns. If 1,000 nuclear bombs went off around the world, he talks about how any kind of remnants of who we are, everything is stored digitally now. All of that would be gone. That infrastructure is gone. So there would be so much art and knowledge that would be lost after something like that. So this is a story that takes place about 1,100 years in the future. And when you think about the type of people that would come out of some horrible event like this, they're going to be, like in my mind, they're going to be the dregs of civilization. They're going to be the cockroaches of society, the harsh ones that are able to endure all of the ugliness if that ever happened. But there are things that are still salvaged, pointless things that probably don't mean anything, you know, in the grand scheme of things, that are saved. The Catholic Church. It's so great to see how 1,100 years from now, organized religion is still just a mess, a disgusting mess. He talks about a Bishop Murillo for, you know, it's sprinkled throughout all 3 books. And it isn't until about 25% of the way through the 3rd book that we finally learn what happened, what that limit, that hard limit was that kind of ruined him and twisted him into what, you know, into the character that we met in the beginning of the 1st book. It is heartbreaking. As the mom of a little boy, if this happened to him, I would just crawl out of my grave and slaughter everyone. Yeah, so this book, I mean, there's sex, there's violence, there's rape, there's lots of rape that happened throughout the last 3 books. There's pedophilia, there's just things that turn your stomach. It's really important to understand all of that ugliness and what kind of people are going to survive in a world after the pinnacle of human, you know, discovery and advancement. So that's what the story's about. There were a few parallels that I saw in this fantasy trilogy that I immediately noticed from another fantasy series that I have recently started reading. And I'm not sure if he meant it as a slap to the face, but it definitely sends a message. But Lawrence can accomplish so much in his succinct, concise writing. And it's not that it's simple writing. I think it can be very complicated and complex to put ideas in a way that, you know, other people can digest and understand. I just really appreciated how Lawrence was able to get all of these ideas and themes across on the page. Lawrence could have easily made this book series go into 4, 5, 6 books. There was a point toward the end where he could have gone another direction, and it's a direction that I would expect him to go. And then he kind of takes a hard 90-degree turn and ends it on a high note. And I was really bummed out about it, but I understand it. And so I have really nothing to say about that. I'm going to read this quote that I think sums up pretty well what the trilogy is about. For whilst the holy may fail in any moment, the damned may in any moment reach for redemption. And I think that nails it. There's nothing else that I can say on that. At the end of the day, I think the Broken Empire trilogy is just a really intriguing take on what society or civilization would be like if something as terrible as all-out nuclear war happened worldwide, what the repercussions of that would be, what civilization would devolve into, and how we could overcome that. So I think it's just a really good speculative fiction in that sense, and I just can't express enough how much I really like this story. So hope you enjoyed my rambling. I am probably going to be a little bit light on the videos in November just because I'm going to take a step back and do less reading and do more writing for NaNoWriMo. I have some pretty aggressive writing goals that I want to hit, so I'm just going to focus on that for a while. I don't know. Like I said, there's so many themes that I could talk about with the Broken Empire trilogy, and the story reminds me of one of my favorite books. It's kind of a classic. It's an old story, Candide by Voltaire. I'll probably do a fun, quick video just talking a little bit about Candide, just because this series makes me think of that. It's on my bookshelf somewhere, so it'd be a quick read through. Anywho, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon. Bye.